And we're live. Thank you all for joining us. This is going to be a very special program today where I'll be interviewing author, writer, Jungian practitioner Paul Levy. Um, Before we introduce the guest, I want to first remind everyone to please join us and um, and like our page and also join our mailing list at the info at the Philip K. Dick Film Festival. Well, without any further ado, I bring you Paul Levy. Paul, how are you?
Oh, I'm great. Thank you so much. It's great being here.
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to have you back. I think there's some people who have this is the first time they'll be hearing from you, and I think it's a great opportunity. Before we start, what I want to do is I want to read a little bit your background to those who are not familiar with your work. Um, Paul is a pioneer in the field of spiritual emergence. He's a wounded healer in private practice, helping others who are also awakening to the dreamlike nature of reality. His work has gone through three phases because of his intense interest in dreams, both night dreams and the dreamlike nature of reality. He was first known as the Dream Guy. After first writing the book Dispelling Wetiko, he became associated with the idea of Wetiko. After the publication of the quantum revelation, he's now seen as connected with quantum physics. All three aspects, dreams, Wetiko, and quantum physics, are interconnected and complementary facets of a deeper reality into which he's continually deepening his investigation. He's the author of the following books: The Madness of George Bush, a reflection on our collective psychosis; Dispelling Wetiko, Breaking the Curse of Evil; Awakened by Darkness, When Evil Becomes Your Father; The Quantum Revelation, a radical synthesis of science and spirituality; Wetiko, Healing the Mind Virus That Plagues the World; and most recently, Undreaming Wetiko, breaking the nightmare of the mind virus. Thank you, Paul, for joining us here.
Yeah, totally. It's my pleasure. I'm excited to be here.
I'm really excited to have you back. I remember the last time that we met. We were, I think, I recall, it's about 2 years ago. We were in the middle of this pandemic, and you at that point you were just you finished off the interview by saying that you were uh, soon about to work or finish up your new book. So what I like to do is, before we start that, because I'm really interested in really diving deep into these implications, can you please give the those who haven't heard of you, a little bit about your background and what is, and clearly what Tico, this mind parasite, has been in your thinking for quite some time. Can you just give us a little bit background info on
Yeah,
your?
for sure. Because my background is unique. It's not like I went to graduate school and got a PhD or something like that. In the sense that I was a happy, healthy kid. And it was only when I was, kind of in college and individuating and separating from my family that all of a sudden, and it was, my father just was, he played his role perfectly, but he was the instrument for this, one could say, this higher dimensional archetypal evil force to come through that, basically tried to destroy me and tried to possess me and tried to make sure I wouldn't become who I am and individuate. And it created enormous suffering for me. I went from being a very happy, healthy, accomplished kid, good student, to all of a sudden not being able to live my life because the trauma of the abuse, the emotional abuse, was so overwhelming. And I dealt with it by going within, by assuming the position of the witness within my own mind. And that was the only thing I could figure out that alleviated my suffering to even the slightest little degree. And then after a couple of years of doing that, hours and hours and hours a day, every day, I had this life transforming spiritual awakening. I got hit by a bolt of lightning in my brain, not from outside. And I went into this completely extreme state in which I began to recognize that this is a dream, that we're having a collectively shared dream. And I was so ecstatic. And I was 24 at that point, and I was so ecstatic at what I was realizing that, it freaked people out. It was like I'd had a radical personality change. And I immediately, within 24 hours, got hospitalized and diagnosed and medicated. And during that next a little bit, maybe under 2 years, I was hospitalized 3, 4, 5 other times and always diagnosed with, oh, you have this newly discovered chemical imbalance. And I not for one, second bought into the diagnosis. It was very, very clear to me inside my own mind that I was having an awakening. And that's what saved me. And then 1982 was the last hospitalization. But then I was like doubly traumatized from the abuse from psychiatry and then from my father. And so I spent the next, 12 years just going to therapy and connecting with my dreams and making art and studying Jung and plant medicine and shamanism and alchemy and anything and everything under the sun that would alleviate my suffering. And then in about 94, that's when I realized, okay, I'm not any enlightened person, but I've at least integrated. I've gone through this initiatory ordeal sufficiently that I have a gift to offer. And that's when I began teaching. And I haven't had to do anything else since. So it's all based on my own experience because I began to realize there was something encoded, holographically encoded within the non-local field. Right. You can call it Wetiko, a mind virus, something malevolent, that was operating through our unconscious blind spots, that was informing what was playing out in my family, through my father, in the psychiatric system, through my reactions, and through the greater body politic of the world, as if they were iterations of the same deeper fractal. That's when I began to realize I was having a revelation that my encounter with evil was actually revelatory. It was showing me something. And luckily, I wasn't destroyed by it, though it completely destroyed my family. I haven't had a family for over 20 years, but I've been fortunate to be able to decipher the gifts from it. That's what's given shape to my work. And that's really what my work is about.
In the book, most recent book that you have, which is the Undreaming Wetiko, you mentioned about even in the midst of this crisis, the universe sent you kind of a confirmation that it was not psychiatric. When you met a client, or not even a client, a woman who was blind, and then you said a few words to her, and apparently she got better. And that, for you, seemed to be a confirmation that this was not just a psychotic break, but something much more, much deeper, much more.
Yeah. Well, in the new book, I talk about, so this was an experience I had, on that very first day of being hit by the bolt of lightning. And I was in such an enthusiastic state, and theos means to be filled with spirit, that, I was brought to this hospital, people thinking I'm in the midst of a psychotic break. And, Highland Hospital, Oakland, California, May 1981. I'll never forget it. They bring me in. It's right after dinner. They bring me into a lounge, where the psychiatric patients are. And I'm in this incredibly exalted state. And I walk in, I see this woman. She's an older woman and she's blind. And I don't even think about what to do. It was like I just knew. I walked right up to her. It was like I was given a script. And out of my mouth came the words, all you have to do to see is open your eyes and look. And I kept on just reciting those words, getting closer to her, looking in her eyes. The whole thing took about a minute, and she regained her sight. And the very next day, so right at that point that happened, they took me and they strapped me up, not on a cross, but on a bed where I didn't really sleep that night. And then the next day, they put me in a room with this woman, this ex-blind woman, and she's smiling, not saying a word. And all of a sudden, my heart chakra just blossomed. And I realized, oh, I get it. She was hysterically blind. But because of that, it was affecting her external blindness. And she was ready to heal. And I was like the Uber driver who was in the vicinity, who got sent to play the role of just saying the words she needed to hear to help her to heal her blindness. And, when I talk about this in the book, that encoded in that scenario is the whole Wetiko mind virus, because Wetiko, right, it's a form of blindness, but it's a self-induced form of blindness, just like she had hysterically made herself blind. And, and yet encoded in the pathology in Wetiko, in this mind blindness, it has its own medicine. It's actually helping us to evolve. But if we don't recognize that, then it's just going to kill us, basically.
Yeah, very fascinating. I mean, again, The books that I have read, I've written. I think I finished your last book, and it's really so much good material there. And I encourage anyone who's listening to really read all of them, starting with Dispelling Wetiko all the way to the most recent. I think so. Your take is that Wetiko is kind of a phenomena, a psychic, almost like a psychic virus that has been recognized by many cultures and writers throughout the ages and under different names and different classifications. And for those who are, of course, PKD, Philip K. Dick festivals, I think your whole take on how Philip K. Dick took and interpreted Wetiko was very, and in some ways was optimistic, in some ways also indicated something about his underlying understanding of reality. Can you just comment a little bit about that?
Yeah. Well, so I've written 3 books on Wetiko, and in the second book, there's a big chapter on Philip K. Dick because it blew my mind when I realized he was completely switched on to Wetiko. He just didn't have the name. He called it the Black Iron Prison, and the way he's describing the Black Iron Prison, it's like word for word what I'm pointing at. And he actually says, he goes, you see, the thing about Wetiko in the apocryphal text of the Bible, they talk about it. They call it the counterfeiting spirit. It impersonates us. It has no creativity, but it plugs into our creativity and turns it against us. But it's this mime, and it will offer us a fictitious version of ourselves. Oh, you're limited, you're wounded, you're traumatized. And if we're not awake and we then identify with the counterfeiting spirit's image of us, then it has us, then it can manipulate and control us. And so Philip K. Dick was super switched on to this. And he actually says, and I have a quote in that chapter, something like, this living, mimicking stuff is the key to everything. And he's right. Exactly. That's why Castaneda is talking about, his teacher, Don Juan,
right,
is pointing out Wetiko. He doesn't have the name either. He calls it a different name, the predator or other names. And he says for shamans, this is the topic of topics. And that's what I'm pointing at. That you see, when people hear about a mind virus and that sounds all woo-woo or new agey or whatever, in essence, what I'm meaning is that the source and the solution of our collective madness is to be found within the human psyche. Right. And where else can it be found? It's a no-brainer. And so that's what I'm pointing at with my work. And that's what Philip K. Dick was switched onto. There's something in the human psyche that operates through our blind spots, through the unconscious, and it captures like the immune system of the psyche, just like the regulatory agencies, the institutions in our world have been captured by the very energies they're supposed to monitor. Because Wetiko, it's an inner disease of the soul that's actually expressing itself via the external world, just like a dream, I should add. And so, Philip K. Dick was super switched on to this. And, and he has a number of, he just contemplates it like in his typical Philip K. Dickian way, which is to say very creative and not fixed in any viewpoint, but omnidirectionally contemplating this phenomena. And like you're saying, Wetiko, it's a dreamed up phenomena. We are co-dreaming it, co-creating it together. And what that means implicit to that is that we can undream it. That's why the current book is called Undreaming Wetiko.
And for you, I guess, according to you, Philip K. Dick is one way of breaking out of this Wetiko is the counterfeit, which I love that whole idea that the minute you have someone who exposes Wetiko, the very first thing they do, they try to vilify it or destroy it or even kill it. Whereas if you counterfeit the counterfeit, this is where, which I think art is one way, according to your work, is one way of getting the word out without bringing in the attention of Wetiko.
Yeah, right. Like Philip K. Dick is, counterfeiting the counterfeiter or creating or faking the fake. And so it's like, so here's the counterfeiting spirit, Wetiko, that counterfeits reality. And Philip K. Dick is pointing out, well, God, or, he has all these different names for the true reality, then mimics the mime. It counterfeits the counterfeit, but it has to do it on the sly because it can't let the counterfeiting spirit know. And just the way he talks about it is so it's just so beautiful because, it's clearly from a mind that's not programmed or conditioned by consensus reality. Because as long as we're still like programmed or conditioned and trying to understand the nature of the problem, well, our conditioned mind itself is part of the problem. And
Right.
Philip K. Dick, I mean, it was very challenging, because he had so snapped out of the mainstream reality spell, but he's offering us an incredible gift for understanding the very malady that afflicts our species, because that's what Wetiko is. This is the malady. This is at the root of our collective madness. This is at the root of the collective evil. And, it's destroying us, but yet I'm pointing out again and again, when you see it, when you see how it operates through the external world, through the unconscious reactions of our mind, then all of a sudden, once you see it, you take away its power. It only has power to the extent that it's not being seen. And by seeing it, not only do you take away its power, you empower yourself. That's why my whole body of work is trying to help people to see it, is trying to help people to open their eyes and look, just like I said to that blind woman. You see, when I had that experience with the blind woman, here are these like idiot psychiatrists trying to tell me, oh no, you have a chemical imbalance, you're mentally ill. Well, when you have an experience like that blind woman, and that was one of many experiences, and that was a minor experience compared to what happened over the next year and a half, there was no one who could convince me, oh, I'm mentally ill. When you have experiences like that, you see, that's what saved me.
Right, and in your most recent work, you also mentioned other writers such as pioneers such as Wilhelm Reich, for instance.
Yeah.
Who talked about that, who himself may have exposed Wetiko, and that's why he was so brutally vilified and thrown.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wilhelm Reich, I'd read years ago, The Murder of Christ, his classic book, and then I reread it a few years ago, and my head exploded because, oh my God, he's pointing at Wetiko. He calls it the emotional plague or the murder of Christ. And he's basically saying that Christ, out of his love for humanity, was allowing himself to like get dreamed up to show how we ourselves. I mean, think about what happened. If you look at the Christ event symbolically, who murdered Christ? We did.
Right.
And so Christ is actually enacting this unconscious drama that's playing out chronically in the unconscious of humanity so as to bring it to awareness. And he actually was saying, yeah, the ending of the murder of Christ is at hand because people are more and more beginning to realize who's murdering Christ. We are. Because what's happening, one way of understanding it is that, in this world we live in, it's getting, dangerous to express ourselves, to speak the truth, to shed light on lies. And so then, if you do, speak the truth, you'll get censored, deplatformed, demonetized, on and on. So what happens, that's an external process. That's an expression of Wetiko, because Wetiko severs our vocal cords. It cuts our voice. Well, then that external process becomes internalized. And then it gets rendered in the unconscious where it becomes chronic. So we then actually, below the level of consciousness, actually, shut down our own voice. And that's the murder of Christ. We're doing that. No one is doing that to us. We're colluding with our own victimization. That's what Reich was talking about in The Murder of Christ. And to the extent that, and that's why I keep on talking about that the real medicine for the mind virus is for us to connect with our true voice, with our daimon, with our guiding spirit, with our creative spirit. And because we are creative beings, we're creating our experience moment by moment, but we're doing it unconsciously in a way that's killing us. That's why I'm trying to point that, wait a second, why don't we just plug in consciously to our creative nature? That is, we're expressing unconsciously or consciously 24/7. And what about if we access it consciously in a way that actually is in service to who we are and not just killing us?
And I wanted to comment on that because two comments. First, when I first read Character Armoring by Wilhelm Reich back in college, I remember the psychiatrist at that point saying, well, Wilhelm had, he was some good points, but when he came down to Murder of Christ, he saw himself as kind of messianic figure. He completely misread the book. I mean, this psychiatrist obviously was dumping down some very negative suggestions regarding Willem Rice's psychosis, just like they consider Philip K. Dick's 2374 experience a psychotic break. Many people say, no, he used just too much acid, too much LSD, instead of listening to the man who said, no, that everything leads up to Valis. All these insights I've had going back my whole life. So people are very quick to judge, and that might be Wetiko acting up. I was thinking more and more about that.
Yeah, that's an exact example of Wetiko, where people, like I've coined in my new book, I coined a lot of acronyms, and I have one, I think it's called premature comprehension syndrome or something like that, and where people will hear about something like Wilhelm Reich or, whatever, and they'll hear like 20 seconds worth, and they'll go, oh, no, I understand what he's saying, where they understand less than 1% of the profundity of what he's saying. So that idea of somebody actually having a revelatory experience and bringing a gift, and people like these idiot psychiatrists, who just are like, oh, no, he just is inflated or messianic or whatever. Yeah, then if you listen to them, then, you've outsourced your own authority and power. So then you're then have fallen under the spell of Wetiko. And here's the actual jewel, like say Reich's work, or Philip K. Dick's work, and you just dismiss it because these seeming authorities who are actually stupid. It's a real genuine form of stupidity and of arrogance and of ignorance, and of Wetiko. You've actually outsourced your authority, given it to them, and then you've aborted any further self-inquiry, and it's tragic.
Yeah, it's amazing how people. When you mention one passage in the Bible, in the New Testament, where Peter, I think it was Peter, cuts the one of the soldiers' ears off, and then Christ turns to him and says, "Behind thee, Satan." I thought, no, this has to be a misquotation. So I actually go there. So that was an understanding that even Christ was seeing Wetiko or this virus or whatever, at that moment, even in Peter, that basically Wetiko can tackle anyone at the weakest point.
Yeah, totally. No, I mean, that saying, get thee behind me, Satan, I learned because I was dreaming about that. I was actually saying that to the Wetiko spirit in my dreams.
Right.
And then I realized, oh my God, I'm enacting like this archetypal motif that Christ had said. And he said it not just to Satan, but to Peter, who was trying to save him from being arrested and actually accomplishing his destiny. And Christ recognized, oh, that's a hidden form of Wetiko. You see, the thing about Wetiko, this mind virus, it's a higher dimensional energy that can possess people, or it can possess like a whole group of people. And when people so taken over, they're oblivious. They have no idea that they unwittingly have become an instrument for this higher dimensional malevolent force to incarnate into the third dimension of our world. And, so yeah, Christ actually was, I mean, every spiritual tradition that's based on wisdom, every, visionary thinkers, philosophers, artists, they're all pointing at Wetiko in their own way, in their own symbols, in language. And just as a modern Westerner, I'm trying to like translate it into a very understandable, like Western idiom, because it's so relevant. It's like, and it can help people so much contextualize what's happening in the world, in their minds, in their relationships, because the world has gone insane, unlike anything we've ever lived through. And understanding this, I mean, that's why Jung says, he literally says this, in times of collective psychosis, the only thing that can save us are new symbolic ideas. And that's exactly what Wetiko is. It's a new symbolic idea. It's a saving idea. That's why the one thing the greatest tyrants in all of history were the most scared of was a new idea, was a magical idea whose time has come. Right. And that's Wetiko. And so I'm just trying to spread it, to spread the word, sort of like, so it goes viral, so it will activate. And it has its own contagious quality, but in a positive way, where it can like psychoactivate us and unleash our creative spirit that is our nature. And that's really what the solution is to what's going on.
You mentioned a Russian, Burdusseff. I'm not sure if
Yeah,
I'm
Berdiev, Nicholas
yeah,
Berdiev. Yeah,
and
yeah.
he believes that creativity is the way out of this malaise, this kind of psychic heaviness that represents itself as Wetiko. And can you just speak a little bit about
Yeah, 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 for sure. So, with Nicholas Berdiev, he was this Russian philosopher, amazing guy. And he is very into like theology and God and the second coming. And he says, yeah, but if we're not being creative, then we're just going to continually see the crucified face of Christ.
right?
And just if we're just passively waiting for the second coming, then it's never going to happen. He goes, it is only through us participating in our own creative expression, us doing that becomes the instrument through which the second coming incarnates through us via our creativity. And it's another way. He's just describing in his own way what I've been talking about the profundity of actually being creative.
I find it very interesting the relationship that exists today between the mainstream media and a lot of the independent media you catch in channels like this one and other channels. It seems like the independent media has almost caught on to that spirit of this writer, of this Russian writer, and they seem to be a lot more open to various possibilities than the mainstream, which seems to be very much controlled by certain agendas. And I want to just give a quick example. I recently saw this movie, The Sound of Freedom, right, and it's about child trafficking. And
Right.
it's for those who have seen it, it's just a movie about that. Nothing else, nothing gore. And I was shocked the way the Rolling Stones and other magazines went after it, calling it a QAnon, even though it was actually made before QAnon. It was like a conspiracy, and these are and CNN, which only 5 years earlier had covered the work of this gentleman and his work in rescuing children, and then now CNN consider it just a lies. So I can't help but think this is what you're saying is correct, that perhaps right now is the worst and the best time, in the sense that Wetiko is way out there and it's really going on all 8 cylinders. Well, at the same time, we know we can look. There also fractures. That's why it's overcompensating.
Yeah. No, I mean it's weird. It's like the best of times, the worst of times, like in a
Right.
superposition of states, in the sense that, the evil and the insanity that's playing out is just over the top. And yet holographically encoded and accessible within that darkness is the potential for people to really wake up. And it makes me think about, it's a known thing psychologically speaking, because I'm a deep student of the psyche. I'm not a psychologist,
Right.
but I'm a student of my own psyche, for 40 plus years. And it's a known thing that, like in a person's process, in a dream, for example, right when you're at the edge of a cliff or in a corner, there's no way out, you're double bound. That's so often the moment where all of a sudden you have the up leveling, you have the lucidity, you have the revelation. And, so I would put out, and I have been putting out that, so that's a situation on an individual psyche that might very well be exactly our situation collectively, that we as a species, we've dreamed ourselves right at the edge of the abyss where we're destroying ourselves. And that actually potentially can catalyze this awakening, both individually and collectively, but that all depends on us. You see, the thing about Wetiko, it's this revelatory experience. It's a revelation, and it's showing us something. It's a dreamed up phenomena. It's a genuine revelation. But if we don't recognize what it's revealing to us, and one of the ways of describing what it's revealing to us, it's showing us the profound importance of the psyche in informing and creating and giving shape to our experience. But if we don't recognize that and actually access our own creative agency and power, then it will just assume it's like programmed function of destroying us. That's our situation in a nutshell.
So how would someone who is for the first time is hearing about these by Wetiko, how would they begin to start looking and seeing what moments in their life where they might be under the influence of this mind
Yeah.
parasite?
Okay. Well, then, no, that's a great question. I mean, I think about just, so because, I have so many people I work with, and so often what I wind up going into is I'll ask people about their creative process, because that's like, I know for me, if I didn't connect with my creative voice, I would have been in deep trouble. And the fact that I was able to, connect with my inner voice and my guiding spirit and express myself creatively is the very thing that saved me. So I'll inquire into that with people. And so many people will be like, oh, I feel a resistance. I feel stuck. And then, I try to illumine, well, what's actually happening right there? Because one of the things that I've discovered in my life, and so many of us have, is that the closer we get to our light, to ourselves, to expressing ourselves, to being ourselves, it consolates the darker forces
Right.
that try to stop us. And that's part of the equation. And instead of that being like a bad thing, we can interpret that like, oh, well, that's a sign we're on the right path. The fact that darker forces are getting activated, trying to stop us, well, clearly they're threatened by something, and they're threatened by us, like actually stepping into our light. Because when we step into our light and see Wetiko, it has no power. It becomes unemployed. So I would just say one way for, like a person who's first beginning to hear about this idea is to inquire into, see how you get to that edge of like, oh, stepping more into an expanded identity or being creative or to incarnate your dream, in this life. And there's something adversarial in your mind. There's something antagonistic. Keep in mind that the devil is the adversary, and what is that? Because as long as that stays unconscious, then you're just going to be compelled as if by fate to play it out again and again. And in a way, you're just re-traumatizing yourself. Because, in a sense, we're all in trauma.
Right.
And Wetiko is completely related to addiction and trauma. So this opens up a whole wider discussion, but would be my first answer.
Yeah, I recall speaking to some people at one of our events who had a problem with meditation. He would actually couldn't sit for more than 5 minutes. All kinds of thoughts would most of them would pop up that were often not even his or he claimed. And I just urged them to stay with those thoughts and see how to just stay in the witness phase, which is a very important state. And eventually he was able to break through, but only after a lot of practice, a lot of mindfulness, which is, I think that's might be one of the things that's missing in today's vernacular, or the idea is of regular, an approach to regular practice in dealing with. This is not something that, oh, I overcame the Tico, I'm good to go, but is this an ongoing challenge? Is that?
Yeah, totally. And that's why, like with my teachers, these great lamas, they're always doing practice. And the idea of developing that mindfulness, that's what I was doing when I was saying I went into my mind, in the early 80s that, precipitated into the awakening. Right. I was just doing Vipassana, just doing insight meditation, just assuming the position of the witness. And what happens is that more and more as you cultivate that mindfulness, you see, well, I guess here's the thing. One way of thinking about Wetiko, it can take us over. It can possess us. The image in the Buddhist teachings is like if you have a newborn baby and you put it on the street and just leave it, somebody will come and steal the baby. You have to kind of protect it and be mindful of it and watch it, just like your own mind. You have to develop that mindfulness, because if not, you can easily just unconsciously get absorbed and identified with a particular thought form or particular perspective or identity, and then you've disconnected from your nature, and the idea of developing that mindfulness, it's really like in the teachings, they use the image of you have this mirror and the reflections, and we typically identify with the reflections or judge them or contract against them. All of that in Buddhism, that's clinging and grasping. But, what we're not doing, we don't recognize the mirror, and the mirror which underlies the reflections is always there, always accessible, always the same, always pure, never tainted by the vilest reflection. That's our nature. That's symbolic of our nature. And there's nothing you need to do to attain that. You already have that. You are that. And you just have to recognize that and just rest and abide in and as that. And then whatever reflections arise are the expression of the mirror. It's not like your thoughts are bad or problematic. You have to transform and get rid of them. No, you can just have the recognition. Oh, yeah, the reflections are the expression of the mirror. and they're actually revealing the mirror. If there's no reflections, I wouldn't see the mirror. The mirror is invisible. That's why in alchemy, they talk about the philosopher's stone as being invisible, So the actual thing that seems to be the obscuration, the reflection, is actually revealing our nature. See, that's the alchemy.
I think that there's a very telling when even our revealed religions like Vedanta, they start talking about the witness as being the original place to start out with. And in a way, when we return back to the witness, we're almost reflecting back to the source, our source. And
Yeah, and exactly. And that witness, which is our source, it is the creative source of the universe,
right.
which we are interfacing with moment by moment, but we don't know it. That's the ignorance. That's the ignorance. And that's where I talk. You see, Wetiko can't steal our soul. Wetiko doesn't even exist. There's no such thing as Wetiko, and yet it can kill us. That's the paradox. So Wetiko can't steal our soul, but what it can do, it can trick us into giving our soul away.
Right.
See, so we're colluding with our own victimization. And and then when you have the realization, and this is what quantum physics, that's why I wrote the book on quantum physics. What quantum physics is revealing to us is that we are moment by moment creating our experience. No one else is doing that. We are. By how we interpret the ink blot, the waking ink blot, by how we impute meaning onto our experience, we are creating our experience. And quantum physics also, I point out, it's articulating the dreamlike nature, because to see the dreamlike nature, that we're all dream characters in each other's dreams, we're all interconnected and interdependent, there's nothing objective. That point of view, to establish yourself in that point of view is kryptonite to Wetiko. Wetiko can't get its hooks into that.
It's interesting that a lot of physicists, even today, are when they think of quantum mechanics, they're more they almost are treated like a kind of statistical tool rather than some sort of a wider philosophical system of approaching reality. But at the same time, paradoxically, you have the people like Wheeler, you mentioned, and Schrodinger, and even Max Planck. They actually, from the beginning, they understood that consciousness was a primal, unitary experience that almost preceded physics. That it was almost like a fundamental property of physics, of reality.
Yeah. And that's why, quantum physics has been around for a century, a little bit over a century, but it's still at the very beginning phases of being understood, because it's so radical. It's beyond radical, because it's pointing out, it was really trying to understand what is the microstructure, what are the building blocks of the physical world. And more as it went down in scale, it realized there's nothing physical. There's actually consciousness. They were discovering the dreamlike nature. And some of the most switched on of the founding fathers, they were realizing this. But a lot of, today's modern corporatized academic physicists, they're just trained to do equations and the whole idea, shut up and calculate if they ask philosophical questions. And, but I'm pointing out, that's why I wrote the book in quantum physics, that the revelations that are emerging from quantum physics are offering us the medicine for Wetiko, because it's showing us not only is there nothing objective, the idea of an objective world is just that, an idea in our mind with no correlate in reality. Quantum physics has empirically proven again and again that the act of observing this universe actually influences the universe that we're observing. That's a description of a dream. That's what I mean, that it's discovered the dreamlike nature of reality. But your typical physicist isn't trained to recognize what that means. And here's the thing, when you recognize there's no objective reality, then it brings up the question, what happened to the subject? If I'm thinking I'm a subject, I'm an ego, I need an object to be in relationship to in order to be a subject. If there's no object, no objective anything, what happened to the subject? You see, the subject, the subjective experience of being an ego and the experience of having an objective world reciprocally co-arise and reinforce each other in a self-creating feedback loop. That's the illusion. And quantum physics is showing us the way through that illusion. And that's the illusion upon all the other illusions, upon which all the other illusions are based on. And that's where I point out that quantum physics has unwittingly promoted itself to be a spiritual path, because it's actually helping us to wake up to the dreamlike nature. It's helping us to wake up to our intrinsic creative agency.
Do you find that more physicists today, perhaps the younger generation, are more open to this uh, approach to quantum physics, or are they still stuck in the old scientist or materialistic version that it's just
Yeah.
statistics?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I coined a term like an objective reality hangover. Like there's such the whole scientific materialist point of view. It's so embedded in the collective unconscious of our species that a lot. I mean, my old next door neighbor, he was a physicist, and he probably thinks my work is complete nonsense because he's very corporatized and academic and under the scientific materialist spell.
Right.
And so I think there are a lot of scientists who, just deep in their subconscious are still having that objective reality hangover. And it entails them doing real deep self-inquiry, which is not necessarily what they've signed up for, but then, I'm hopeful because, hopefully younger physicists or psychedelicized physicists or people who are having spiritual experiences, might be more awake, in a way, to the nightmare of the scientific materialist spell that makes us think that there's an objective world and that there are separate things. Like the quantum universe is like there's no separate things at all. There's no separate anything. It's all just one seamless wholeness. That's the nature of a quantum reality, and it's proven. It's been proven this is through and through on every scale a quantum universe. And so but it's so radical for people to see that, because it involves like seeing through the illusion of who we've been imagining we are, which is a separate self. And that is Wetiko. Wetiko, in essence, a form of blindness. It operates through the projective tendencies of the mind, through the unconscious, but it's a misidentification of who we think we are. To the extent that if I think I'm a separate self, then you're an other. If you're an other, then there's fear. Fear is the superfood for Wetiko. And that self-generates again and again until seen through. So what I'm talking about is seeing through the illusion of the separate self, having the recognition that we're interconnected, interdependent. The energetic expression of that is compassion. Compassion is our nature. And that's kryptonite to Wetiko.
And you mentioned in your next to last book, you mentioned that regarding Philip K. Dick and other traditions, that it's not just about saving ourselves. It's about helping save others, have them wake up to the dreamlike nature of reality.
Right.
And by doing so, as long as it's about myself, you're still creating that separation between me and the world. Whereas the attitude, which is more Buddhist in nature, is about saving the world, saving the other. But thereby you save yourself. I think that there's an understanding that we're all connected at a deep level.
And that's the bodhisattvic idea. Like in Buddhism, the idea is somebody's becoming enlightened. They're about to enter into nirvana. And then they look and see all their fellow suffering, their brothers and sisters, their dream characters, parts of themselves. Right. And that's when you make you take the bodhisattva vow that I won't enter nirvana until I bring everyone else there first. Because who is everyone else? Just aspects of you. We're interconnected. Right. We're all cells in a greater organism. We're not separate, And so the idea of being in service, and that's a question. Say one of or all of your listeners, they like wake up in this moment and they're like, oh, wow, now I realize who I am and my essence is love and compassion. And, well, okay, great. Well, what do you do with that? How do you like share that? How do you, step into being in service to others? That's the idea. And I'm doing that in my own, sort of this little way of trying to create a body of work that's helping people to wake up. But we're all, in a way, tasked to do that.
It's almost like all the revealed religions and some shamanistic ones as well almost describe the essence with different words and different practices. But if you follow one, you get to the very center. I mean, they all talk about basically very similar relationship between one and the universe. Now there are a lot of people who are just wondering, well, what practices besides meditation or mindfulness, what other things can they do? Say they created, how can they at least keep Wetiko at arm's length or prevent it from infecting their thinking? You say creativity is one way.
Yeah. And, having, I mean, because our nature, it's such a cliche. Oh, in a way, the greatest protection against Wetiko is to remember who we are. Well, who are we? What does that mean? Well, our nature, our true nature is by its very nature creative. So the more we realize our nature, the more we embody and express ourselves creatively. And the more we express ourselves creatively, the more we deepen our realization of our nature. It's a positive feedback loop. And by creativity, I don't mean just painting or drawing. I mean, that's a flatland version. I mean, that is being creative, but I'm talking about the way we go about our lives, the way we wash dishes, the way, moment by moment, where, we're creatively casting a spell on ourselves that's either liberating or like, imprisoning. And, so on the one hand, like cultivating, awareness and mindfulness, absolutely. But I know people who are, identified with being deeply spiritual and don't feel that it has anything to do with being creative. And that just like blows my mind, because the idea of true spirituality is that we are creative beings. We are made in the image of our creator, and we are meant to create. And that's what I'm pointing out. Because we're unconscious, we are creating or like co-dreaming up a reality that's killing us, because we're not in touch with our creative agency and power. In other words, if somebody came to me with a dream, and the dream was exactly what's happening in the world with the pandemic and the lockdown in Ukraine and all the insanity, and they would say, "Oh, I just had this dream," right? How would I interpret the dream? I would basically say to them, well, it's clear you're not in touch with your creative power. You've outsourced it. And then external powers are using your own creative agency against you in a way that's like imprisoning you. And so what the dream is revealing is, to the extent that any of us actually embody being creative, getting in touch with our guiding spirit and becoming an instrument for that to actualize itself through us, and us embodying that has an infectious quality, a contagious quality. And when we connect with other people who are also tapped in that way, it can go viral. And then we begin to realize, oh, wow, we actually can support each other in our realization. And we actually can have the realization that we can participate in our own evolution. And that's what this is about, is like reflecting to us, revealing to us that we are now invited to consciously step into our own evolution. And if we don't do that, then we're doomed.
Now, you bring up some interesting topics, because a lot of people are concerned about the economy, the war in Ukraine, the politicization, the polarization that's going on, and so there's definitely a lot of room for negativity but what trends on the more positive end, or more slivers of light, have you seen in since the pandemic? Because a lot of people would probably agree that pandemic was not a good thing for them. But what slivers have you seen that suggest that if we can manage this somehow, break out of this little?
Yeah, no, I see a lot more than slivers. I mean, I study stuff every day and go down the rabbit hole, and have developed an aesthetic that, I want to more and more just understand the evil. And instead of it depressing me, it actually inspires me to even write a better book. But I also see that it's like in the alchemical vessel of humanity, of our psyche, there is incredible pressure, and more people are actually plugging into that pressure in a way that's helping them to awaken to their nature and to connect with their creative spirit. And that's, I mean, that's just my experience. I see that all over the place, and that gives me incredible hope. And quantum physics, is pointing at the same thing. I mean, just in essence, they're saying, before, there are these, they call them quantum entities or elementary particles, the building blocks, and they exist in a state of potentiality in every and any state of potential they ever could possibly manifest in, until the moment of observation. And then we observe that quantum entity, and it actualizes into a particular specific form, and all the other possibilities just vaporize. Well, the point is, even if one of those possibilities is highly ridiculously unlikely, it could be the one that manifests in this very moment. and to connect that with our world, the idea that humanity could awaken sufficiently, that there could be sufficient number of us, like the 100th monkey phenomena, or in the Bible, they talk about 144,000, this symbolic number. When there's enough yeast in the dough, the bread rises. If enough people sufficiently awaken, we can actually avert the catastrophe and, have a universal global awakening. Quantum physics says, oh, that's completely 100% within the realm of possibility. And I would say, and if you're not envisioning that, then what are you thinking? If you're caught by pessimism and seeing through a pessimistic lens, then you're part of the problem, because then you're going to actually create evidence that's going to confirm your viewpoint. That's the power of your dreaming, So more and more people, thankfully, are actually plugging into their own creative power.
And I think that's where I would like to end it with, that people need to not focus so much on the other cultural leaders, what they're saying, but what about their own reality, how they can continue to expand and build and create things in their own life. Because it's very easy to either turn on to social media or Facebook, even YouTube channels that talk about different news and become sucked into that negative vortex. But I think that one has to resist that as well, and really feel there are a lot of us out there that are waking up to the reality of our own creativity, and that's the way out of this challenge that we're living in.
Yeah, and not just the idea that there are other people who are awakening, but to actually connect with other people.
Connect with them, right?
In that if I help you, it helps me, because we're not separate, and it can really become contagious, in a way, in a very, very real way. And in my first Wetiko book, I talk about the danger of over pessimism, but I also talk about the danger of over optimism.
Right.
People who talk about, oh, God's going to save us. Well, not really. We're the dreamers. We are the ones who are dreaming this. And it's really up to us to recognize there's something being revealed. That, in essence, is the real bottom line of my work. There's something being revealed to us through the psychic epidemic, the Wetiko mind virus. And, if we recognize what it's showing us about who we are, our creative power, the role the psyche plays in creating our experiences in the world, then we can actually tap into that and channel it consciously and constructively. But if we don't recognize it, then guaranteed we're doomed to continue to destroy ourselves.
It almost has to do with knowing where to look and where to hear. And just like, it kind of reminds me of the story of the scarab beetle. I think you mentioned it in your book.
Yeah, I have a big chapter on synchronicity, and I use that example of the scarab. Yeah.
And that it's just it was almost like the universe is always sending us messages.
Yeah. Well, the idea of the universe being like a shared, a collectively dreamed up dream, the universe is an oracle,
right.
And that's why the importance. Jung spent his whole life trying to get across the idea of symbolic awareness. Symbols are the language of dreams, that this is a dreaming process, this universe, and it's an oracle, and it's continually speaking to us symbolically. But we fall in deaf. We don't speak the language. And that's one of the things in my work, is trying to get across to people how to see symbolically, how to see this as a dream and interpret it as such. And then it's continually an epiphany, like a theophany, a continually unfolding revelatory experience that's continually guiding us and helping us.
Which brings up to the subject of the Sufi masters, the Tawil process, a process of Tawil. Right. Of seeing reality symbolically, which I think is the key. It's not just to see it as, because it is all symbols, from what, according to quantum mechanics, it's all symbolism and
quantum mechanics is a symbolic procedure. No, right. Totally. And the idea in Islam, the Tawil, it's all about bringing in symbolic awareness so that we can we could allow the oracular universe to reveal itself. That, in essence, is what it is.
Fantastic, Paul. Want to ask you, are you working on, your new book just came out a couple of months ago, so I'm sure, but I know you're always working on something else. Is this something you want to share with us, or is it too early?
Yeah, or just, the quantum physics book is, it's being republished by Inner Traditions next year, an expanded version, where I've included, my continual, just these revelations. And so that'll be out within a year, or in about a year or so. And yeah, and I'm just continually trying to get the word out, because this is medicine, and that's why on my website, it's not really monetized. I have like a ton of articles and interviews all for free, because I just want to get this information out.
Medicine for the soul, very important.
Yeah, totally.
Well, thank you a lot again, Paul, and I'm sure we'll meet again and we'll talk again in the future as soon as you have your new re-edited version of your new book. Being more than happy. I know you're always incorporating new information. And then anyone who's watching, please, I'm gonna put the links below on all the books and which is the best? Is this the awakening to the dream reality of your website?
Yeah, the way I say it, if people want to awaken in the dream, go to awakeninthedream.com. That's my website.
Fantastic. I'm just, and I'll be adding some links below so others can follow your work, because
Great.
I know you have private, as well as you have private consultations for those who are perhaps having a breakthrough or in a symbolic moment. I'm sure that you're more than happy to speak with them.
Yeah, for sure. Totally.
Well, Paul, again, thanks again for your generosity, for your time.
Oh, totally. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
God bless, and we'll speak soon.
Totally. Okay, so take care.
Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Well, that's it, folks. Another Philip K. Dick and Psychedelic Film Festival experience. If you haven't done so, please like this channel on the YouTube, or like our Facebook page, so we can continue to go up the algorithms. In the next couple of weeks, we're going to have other new, we'll be interviewing some other people in different areas. So stay tuned. And also you can check us, put yourself on our list, info at the Philip K. Dick Film Festival. So all you guys and gals have a great time. Enjoy the rest of the day. And again, thank you for participating. Bye-bye. Have a good day.